their heads are going to explode at the prospect of someone being sent to jail for keeping their child at home. I don't know. We might examine that later, although you'll struggle to get through at the moment. And Rachael Venables has joined me in the studio with the latest update on her astonishing journalism, looking at the number of people whose homes have been rendered worthless, literally worthless, by a continuing cladding crisis.
James, since we spoke about this issue yesterday, I have to say I have been absolutely overwhelmed by the numbers of people getting in touch to say this is my story too. I am trapped in my home, unable to sell. We're talking about people...
You could tell yesterday, by the way, the inbox and the phone lines lit up when you were talking about it.
And I think there's two things here. One is that this affects so many people. I mean, one estimate thinks it could be as many as 3 million people in these flats which could be affected by this, needing this EWS1 form, which I'll explain a bit more about in a minute. And also because this actually hasn't been talked about. Many people saying thank you for talking about this, for sharing this story, because for one reason or another, it just hasn't really had the push out yet that I think so many people clearly feel that it deserves. And we're talking here about people right across the country. I've had messages from people in Kent, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Cardiff. And as I said, their homes have been valued at zero because they don't have this new survey carried out on their building, a survey which costs tens of thousands of pounds to certificate that their building is cladding safe. Now, Sebastian O'Kelly is the chief executive of the charity Leasehold Knowledge, which supports leaseholders, and he told me that this is a huge crisis brewing.
We're looking at a perfect storm of disasters descending on the heads of people who own flats, and they are largely unsellable now because mortgage lenders want to know that the sites are safe, and most sites cannot demonstrate that they are safe. So you've got 900,000 to 1 million people living in blocks of flats that are higher than 18 metres, and all of them are impacted by this fire safety bill and the cladding crisis.
Now, this all has its roots, again, in Grenfell, and the realisation after that tragedy that thousands of buildings had similar, dangerous, expensive to remove cladding. As you'd expect, that spooked banks, mortgage lenders, insurers, and last winter the Royal Institute for Chartered Surveyors introduced this EWS1 form, an external wall survey form, as a way of regulating and controlling the valuation process of high-rise flats. It was meant just for buildings over 18 metres, but then government regulations changed in January, and since then lenders have basically been asking for this form for any building really with flats. So
do we know government regulations changed for safety reasons?
For safety
reasons, it was the right thing to do, but perhaps not properly thought through.
And with wide-ranging implications that I don't think they would have seen coming, because lenders are choosing to ask for this form. It's not mandatory, certainly coming from the government. And what you've got is buildings that are lower than 18 metres high, maybe with just a small bit of cladding or even just a bit of timber framing around the balconies. And lenders are asking for this form as well. And then what you have is pushback from the building owners who are refusing to pay the tens of thousands of pounds to get the form, to get the survey done, because as far as they're concerned, it doesn't benefit them and they don't legally have to have it. And also, I mentioned this number, 3 million people, it's thought live in these buildings, these flats, which could be affected.
That's huge.
It's created a huge backlog because there are only so many people who can actually do the investigations in the first place. I've been sent one example, an email from a worker at Peabody, who are a huge housing association. They've got more than 2,000 buildings that are over 11 metres tall. They think it will be up to 10 years, James, before all this work is done. So that is people out there now who for a decade won't be able to sell their flats because they are at the bottom of the priority list. And O'Kelly, who you just heard about, really said to me, the problem is just that this is too big a job.
It's an expensive procedure. You know, it starts at about £40,000 to do a EWS1 survey of a high-rise block of flats, and there's not that many people in the country who can do it. We think there are fewer than 300 people with the relevant qualifications who could actually do this sort of survey.
The question I was going to ask you, was whether or not... Actually, I'll come to it at the end. Sorry, carry on, Rachel.
OK, well, as you heard there, fewer than 300 people then to do a survey on what... The numbers are quite difficult here, but what could be as many as 300,000 buildings. It really depends on the lenders, affecting, as I mentioned, potentially 3 million people. And these are people who I've been hearing from in the last 24 hours, people like Kate. During lockdown, she gave birth to a daughter, and now, understandably, with a young family, she's desperate to move out of her small flat, but they can't move out because of this survey. She spoke to LBC and Nick Ferrari this morning.
So we're looking to move and...
Yeah, of course.
Have a bit more space for our daughter. And on Thursday, on Wednesday, the surveyor came round for the mortgage company. And Thursday night, we got an email to say that our flat is essentially worthless. We got returned in no value.
God.
And so we can't move. We don't know how long that's going to take. We're going to lose a buyer. We're going to lose the house that we found for our new family, and it's heartbreaking. It's been a rough year, apart from the birth of our daughter, and we're heartbroken by it.
Of course, that poses the question of how many people have no idea that they're caught in precisely the conundrum that you've been reporting on.
Exactly. She found out on Thursday.
Holy moly.
She had never heard of this form before. They'd been beaten down already because they had a buyer. They wanted to move at the end of last year. They had a buyer who backed down because of COVID. As I understand it, they possibly lost their job. So then they had to wait. She gave birth, and now they really want, to leave the city, get a place with a garden. And just as they had the chain set up, they found their perfect home. Someone wants to buy their flat. And then to find out in an email as well that your house is worthless is so
That's
difficult.
the only asset most of us have.
Absolutely.
I mean, the lucky ones to have an asset at all, otherwise...
And it affects people on the other side of it as well. I've had a message from one woman who is desperate to get onto the property ladder. She wants to, I think based on her situation, maybe move out of the family home, leave her parents. She's seen a one-bed flat in London that she wants. And she's also looking to take advantage of the stamp duty holiday, which the Chancellor has introduced. Remember, there's a deadline until March where people can save thousands of pounds if they buy a property. But she can't get this flat again because of the survey. So there's a whole host of people who've been affected here. And on top of these people who are trapped, unable to sell, as we heard yesterday, some of them end up having to pay huge costs for safety works. And I've been speaking this morning with the Labour MP for Vauxhall, Florence Eshalomi, because she's been working with constituents in one such block that had the test, and the test proved real fire safety faults.
After the inspection was carried out, the fire inspection by the London Fire Brigade mandated a walk-in watch. And this walk-in watch for this particular group of tenants and this particular estate, we're talking in excess of £10,000 per week. That is just not sustainable for anybody. So you're effectively left in limbo now, and that's what the residents are finding themselves.
And she told me she believes the government now really need to seize this issue and to step in.
Especially at this period where, in essence, we've got the stamp duty holiday, and the government is essentially trying to tell the banks, to get the economy moving, kickstart everything. We need to get more people buying. We need to see more properties being built. That's not going to work if we've got a section of homeowners who are trapped, who are not able to engage in this process. You're effectively blocking all of them off. So I think we need the government to actually go back to RICS, BSA, UK Finance and the banks to say, actually, there are some properties which would be compliant. So in essence, we need you to start lending.
So that was Florence Eshalomi there, the Labour MP for Vauxhall, speaking to me. And she also, as I said, talked about the number of residents she's been speaking to recently who found themselves in this awful position. But of course, it's not just a London issue. This is a national issue affecting so many people.
What does the solution look like? I hesitate to ask you this question, and for the benefit of the tape, Rachel just sort of rolled her eyes there, or at least sort of...
Deep intake of breath.
Which possibly is speaking louder than words.
To be honest, I've asked that question of the people I've spoken to, whether they're experts, whether they are the chartered surveyors, whether they are the people who are living in these flats, and really many people don't seem to know the answer. I think they feel as though someone needs to step in and properly have a conversation with all of the players involved here, the lenders, the Institute of Chartered Surveyors, the government, and come up with some sort of situation, because at the moment it is just untenable. You have too many buildings, not enough investigators, and a situation which has been brewing for years, which is obviously problematic building regulations, cladding being put on buildings that shouldn't have been, buildings being built
And
safely,
Hughes,
and it hasn't been picked up on until you get surveys like this one.
And arguments about whose job it is to fix that help either. And this is not going to go away, is it? It's a story that is going to grow. Presumably you'll have more people getting in touch with you today. And that poor woman who found out on Thursday that the flat she thought she was about to sell was technically worthless at the moment. Rachael Venables, an awful lot of praise coming in for the quality of your journalism, and I can only add my voice to theirs. This is absolutely huge. Thank you. It's 11:47.